Side here, back again with another video. Food for thought. Today we're going to be discussing the Ukraine war and what the real motivation or causes behind it. A lot of you have been watching mainstream media and have been under the impression that this is just an act of aggression by Russia, unprovoked act of aggression. They just want to expand their territory. They're just evil, wicked, cruel bastard Putin. Alright? I'm sure that's what you've been told, and quite a lot of you have believed that. Ukrainians are good people and we support Ukraine and Slava Ukraine and whatnot. It's been heavy bombardment of media propaganda that if you're not smart or wise, able to actually sit back and think, right? Exercise your brain, think logically, and put the emotions aside. You would not be able to actually formulate and come to the actual reason for this conflict in Europe. So I'm going to break it down for you quickly. This is a short video, not too in-depth, but just giving you an idea of why the war is going on in Ukraine, the reason for it, and how it will likely end. Alright, so let's start by saying this. Russia is the largest country on earth, right? Largest. The USA, by comparison, covers approximately 8.5 million square miles, or square kilometers, I should say. So almost double the size of the USA, Russia is. With that size of a landmass, Russia has a whole lot of what we call resources. And what do I mean by resources? Well, Russia has mountains, it has plains. On these plains, with rich, fertile soil, you can grow crops, right? You can grow wheat, you can grow a whole list of crops, food crops, and so forth. It also has a huge coastline along the Arctic Circle. And along that coastline, you have the continental shelf. And usually where you have continental shelves, which is basically convergence zone below the crust, or where the crust, two crusts or two continents meet each other, it's a convergence zone. Usually in those regions, you tend to have huge deposits of oil, right? As I said, Russia has a massive shoreline with the Arctic Ocean. So the total amount of oil and natural gas at its disposal, I don't think anyone has been able to fully quantify it as yet. Now, the USA has been known to be a resource-hungry nation. That is how it's able to, that is how it conducts its diplomacy and foreign policy, right? By using resources and plundering other nations to get some of what they have. That is what their foreign policy states. That is how they profit. And that is how they keep their empire resourced, fed, and keep their global control over other states and nations. Right, so before I go into why America does this, or how it does this, let me just finish up with Russia first by saying that Russia shares many borders with many countries. Right? It shares a massive border with China. So you know, in terms of trade, there's a lot of profit to be made there, right? Between China and Russia, to and fro. It has a border with North Korea as well. situated very, very close to Iran. Right? So it has the European landmass, or say specifically, it has the European countries to the west. It has the Arabian and Middle Eastern countries to the south. It has the Asian countries to the east, all of whom can do trade and business with. So this opens a massive economical potential for Russia when it comes to world dominance, world trade, and world power. This is what America can't stand. America don't want this. They want to be unilateral, unipolar world power. The one that says yes, no, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. They can't have Russia coming up and starting to dictate terms and dictate things. That's madness. They can't have that. So they have to find a way to try and stop Russia, destroy Russia, split up Russia, break up Russia, whatever they have to do. They have to find a way to bring an end to this economic rise that is taking place in Russia. So how does America go about doing that? Now, I will give you some pretext about the American foreign policy and how it operates. You see, back after World War II, after World War II, get this thing down so you can see me better. Yeah. After World War II, all the countries involved were severely hampered and depleted economic-wise, except for one country. You know what that one country is? The United States. Right? So everyone else was severely depleted. Russia lost about 27 million men. Britain lost a lot of men, their economy tanked. France, all of those countries, their economy was completely depleted, except for one, that is America, because America joined the war very late. As a matter of fact, in the beginning of World War II, they were actually supplying arms to both sides, both the Nazi Germany and the European allies. Right? So America was a bitch from even back then. so that's what happened in World War II. Right? So at the end of World War II, the only country, as you know, toward the end of World War II, America dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, right? Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And at that time, it was the only power in the world that had atomic bombs that were able to be deployed, right? So they had some leverage from that, as well as economic stability. So that is where America, or America's dominance, came to be at the forefront. They had the military advantage in the sense that they had an undisputable weapon, deadly weapon that nobody else had, which was the atomic bomb. They had the strongest economy coming out of World War II, so they were the de facto leader or leaders of the world at that time. But what America realized is that even though they were in such a position to lead the world, they would not be able to profit from it fully because their US dollar was backed by gold, and gold, as you know, is a finite resource. So as long as you use it, your money is backed by a finite resource. There's only so much money you can make, right? Because you have to sell gold to get dollars, sell dollars to get gold. It's a finite system. So they came up with the idea of say, okay, what resource, what naturally occurring resource is there that is almost infinite? Not infinite, but almost infinite. Which resource is there out there that we can use to prop up our US dollar and be, in fact, the de facto world power in everybody's eyes? That is when, in 1971, they announced that the dollar is no longer backed by gold. but instead would be backed by oil. Right? That is the one resource that is global in massive quantities, massive scale, oil. This is where um, it brings to rise what, hold on, let me turn this thing. It brings to rise what is called the petrodollar. Right? So the American dollar is backed by oil. Now the USA has one major problem with this system. They have a finite amount of oil, but there are other places in the world that have oil as well. Let me name a few. You have Venezuela, you have Iran, you have uh, Saudi Arabia, you have Canada, you have Russia, and quite a few other countries, the UAE and so forth, where they have vast quantities of oil, and Libya and so forth. So America had to devise a plan where they could influence these countries in a way that they can control the output of their oil, um, and control how they sell their oil to maintain their US dollars. So they gave certain perks, economic benefits, incentives, as well as defensive incentives. So they give a military base there to say, okay, we'll protect you from invasion and so forth if you sell your oil in US dollars. Right? We won't come for your oil or nothing, but just sell it in US dollars. So if China buys oil from Iran, let them pay you in US dollars and we're good. Right? If you're selling it to somebody, let them pay you in US dollars. That keeps your dollar good, and we won't have any problems. Plus, we're giving you a military base right beside, so you are well protected and nobody can trouble you. Right? You have charging, everything crispy. Right? That is how they started. Now, you had a few countries who don't like the idea of America halfway around the globe dictating to them, telling them what they can buy, what they can't buy, and how they must sell their oil, how much in terms of volume they should produce, who they should give it to and who they shouldn't give it to. There are a few countries that were not having none of that. Right? So then none of them can have foolishness. A sovereign state, but what they want to do, and them Anglo-Saxons they now come tell them to do this, have to do that. Right? They have their own political and economical ambitions. So America needs to step aside and stop telling what to do. And in this situation, something very peculiar happened. If we bring you around the time in 2000, 2001 actually, I think no, 2000, November 2000. You want to hear this name before? Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, in 2000, seeing how America was using its power to blackmail and influence nations, he said he wasn't having any more of that. Right? He decided that he's going to fight against this global hegemony that the Americans have put forth. He is going to sell his oil to other countries in euro and not the dollar. Okay? And he signed a decree in November 2001 to this effect. But listen, we're done with the oil business now. We don't sell the oil in US dollar. You're not going to tell you what to do. And as a matter of fact, we're going to sell it in euro, a direct competitor to you. Right? Because at that time, the euro is very strong. America looked at it and said, oh, he's a bad man. Right? America looked at it and said, you want to bamba. You want to chill with the big boys. So they had to come with a reason to set this thing straight. They had to put their foot down, America, and show other countries in the region that, listen, this is not how it's going to go. But they could not do it off the cuff like that because America has never been in any issues with Iraq. Right? They had a Gulf War long before, but those issues were settled. But they haven't had any recent problems where Iraq attacked one of their bases or nothing like that. There was no uprising, nothing at all. So they can't just get up one day and say, okay, we're going to Iraq to fight. Fight for what? There's no reason for fight. Right? So they had to come with a new policy in place where they have the God-given right to, in their estimation, they have the God-given right to go into any country and spread what it calls is democracy, right? As a as a means of taking over the resources and setting a government that is favorable to the US, but they call it democracy. Right, so that was their intention then. Right? So you use a guise of democracy, you go into the country, and then you do what you want to do. They don't want to sell oil in US dollar, you go in there, take over their oil industry, plunder their economy, and you teach them a lesson, and you get your money's worth out of it. But as I said, there's something large has to happen, something major has to happen to trigger that change in foreign policy and to get the American people and the rest of the world on board with it. This is a very long video actually, but it is what it is. So that is how 9/11 came about. Right? Yes, I know some of you will say, conspiracy theories and yada yada, but the evils of this American government and the American system, trust me, you have no idea about it. This is why 9/11 came about, to cause such anger in the American public and in the world that it would give America almost autonomous power to do whatever it needs to do to spread its democracy and get rid of these authoritarian terrorist regimes across the world. That is why 9/11 happened. And that is why the United States invaded Afghanistan shortly thereafter to try and destabilize the region in the Middle East. That's the sole purpose of it. They didn't go to Afghanistan to win a war, because there's no war there to win. You see, they went there to get Bin Laden, right? So there was no war to win. Bin Laden was killed when, 2010? Right? What war was there to win? There was no war to win. You went there, you did what you say you had to do, and you're still there for 20 years. The purpose wasn't to win a war. The purpose was to destabilize the Middle East. So immediately after they went into Afghanistan to cause a destabilization in the Middle East, they decided that they need to go to Saddam Hussein, because he still had this policy in place where he was selling oil in euro as opposed to USD, and they can't have that because they're losing money. And if you're losing money, the value of the USD drops. If the value of the USD drops, the US economy suffers, so they can't have that. So they came up with the idea that he was procuring weapons of mass destruction, something that they have never found any evidence of whatsoever. And with this idea, and drumming up public support, they went into Iraq. They hunted down Saddam Hussein. They killed him. They put in a government that was pro-USA, and they restored the dollar for oil hegemonic economic policy in Iraq. Right? Simple as that. They went in, got rid of the bad guy, the boogie guy, killed Saddam, restored their policy, and then walked back out again. This is how America maintained its dominance in the world. A second event took place in Libya. See, Libya is the wealthiest nation, or was the wealthiest nation in Africa. Wealthy, I mean, they had gold in abundance, they had oil, they had free universities, free schooling, free housing, free everything. Education was free. Muammar Gaddafi made everything free for his people. Libyans were living the best life ever, the very best life. And it's such a sad case when I think about it, because now you look at Libya, you realize that Libya, there's nothing going on in Libya, right? Now Libya is a desolate place, absolutely desolate. Destruction all around, all of that wealth has evaporated, gone. Why? because Muammar Gaddafi, seeing how wealthy Libya was and seeing how prosperous Africa could become, he came with the idea that Libya would sell its resources to Africa. Well, not sell its, Libya would create a currency that is backed by gold, which it has an abundance of, and sell it among its African peers. Right? So the wealth can be redistributed among Africa. So other African countries, the Nigerias and the Ethiopias, can become as wealthy and as prosperous as Egypt, as Libya itself, sorry. Right? It's a brilliant plan. Brilliant plan if you think about it. It was a plan to build the African continent, awaken the sleeping giant so everybody can prosper. Right? Get rid of poverty in Africa. America couldn't have that. You can't be selling your oil for gold and building up Africa and all of that bullshit. Build up Africa. Can't happen. So guess what America did? They sent their military US Marine Corps into Libya after they staged some disturbance in the political system because of civil war. They sent their Marine Corps in there. They got the NATO partners to come in there to say that they're going to help promote democracy and get rid of the dictator, the totalitarian dictator named Gaddafi. Right? So what they did? They went in there, killed him, restored back the natural order of things, which is look at see there. Restore the natural order of things, which is oil for US dollar. So you sell your oil for the USD, right? And got rid of that stupid idea about gold and oil and all that nonsense. Get rid of that foolishness and sell your oil back for USD. Right? So they went back and they reset the entire thing, put it back to where it was, got rid of who they had to get rid of, put it the government that they wanted in place, and everything was back to normal. That is the American way. Right? So all of these things you hear about weapons of mass destruction or evil dictator or whatever, no, it's nothing about that. It's simply about maintaining oil and maintaining the petrodollar, which is the world's reserve currency, the US dollar. They call it the petrodollar because it's backed by oil. Maintaining its dominance in the world so that America maintains its dominance in the world. Now, why do I mention these two countries, Iraq and Libya? It's because now America has set its sights on Russia. Because as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, Russia has a whole lot of resources, namely oil and natural gas. And guess which demonic empire wants to get its hands on it? The dirty stinking United States. So how can they do that? They can't just walk into Russia and say, hey, give me your oil. What? You can't do that, right? Everybody would see it for what it is. They can't just come in there and say, oh, we're going to kill Putin and take his oil. It doesn't work that way. So you have to come with a solid argument or something solid to get people to say, okay, the Americans have a point here. So what do? They start to try and instigate certain measures to try and draw Russia out, right? Provoke Russia. So they start to expand NATO, even though they said they would never expand it. After 1991, they started to include more countries going towards Russia's border, provoking Russia, right? Putin has been warning for at least a decade, if not longer, that NATO needs to stop its expansion towards Russia's border. Right? And Americans say, oh, we're not expanding nothing, man. You need to chill, relax yourself. Why are you going on like that? While they still expand and expand and expand and expand and expand. But you see that even though they're expanding, Putin is not such a maniac to just act like that. He's very thoughtful. He's very concise. He's a very wise person, right? So that in itself did not trigger him. So they have to think, what else can we do? We need to get a reaction out of him so we can start to implement our processes. So they start with Ukraine. Now, why Ukraine? Ukraine is a country that has about 25% Russian population throughout the east of it, right? So, in their estimation, let's cause some conflict in Ukraine. Let's make Ukraine as disgusting as possible. Create anti-Russian sentiment. Make them a horrible place to be, right? Let them despise the Russians because they live right on the border. Let's build up their military to massive proportions, right? Let's make them as degenerate as possible. Put Nazis over there, put rapists over there, put evil people, put everything that's bad over there, right on the border of Russia. And then let them kill as many Russians as possible, which is why from 2014 to present, they have been sending rockets and bombs into the Donbas region, which is where the Russians are living in Ukraine, killing up to 14,000 of them in that period of time, just to provoke Russia into retaliating. So in February 24th of this year, 2022, Putin finally had enough. And he said, oh, all right, we have to clean up, we have to clean house now. And he launched a special military operation in Ukraine, which is exactly what America wanted. And guess what now? Now they can bring down the whole house of cards on Russia, right? They can throw the kitchen sink at Russia, right? So they pull out their economic sanctions, trading sanctions, all kind of sanctions they throw at Russia. Everything that they wanted to do for the last 10 years, they had the chance to do it now. So they just throw everything. Massive propaganda, economic sanctions, cut them off from the banking community, cut them off from trading routes, cut them off from all of the other economies. This was done with the hope and expectation of causing an uprising in Russia, which would lead to the overthrow of Putin, which would then lead to the installment of a pro-American democratic government, to then open up Russia and its markets to American investors. And guess what America will get their hands on? All of that nice fancy resource and all of that nice fancy oil and natural gas. But they didn't bank on the fact that Putin had seen them. Right? I say he's a wise man. He's not a fool. He's not an idiot. Right? He has seen the plan that was being sketched from a long time. So he prepared his country. Between 2014 and 2022, Russia tripled its output, domestic output of wheat, right, and other natural resources, which includes rare earth minerals and such. Right? It shook up its industry to make it more nationalized. Right? Got rid of some of dissenting voices. Yeah, Russia is not perfect. We have to get rid of some of the pro-democracy voices in their country that want to get the Americans in. So they have to execute a few of them. As I say, it's not a perfect country, but you have to do what you have to do to fight against the Americans, knowing what they have planned. So there were a few assassinations and so forth between 2014 and 2022 to try and set the stage so that when America finally had the opportunity to do their blitzkrieg of sanctions on Russia, Russia will be able to withstand. And this is where we are now. At this specific point, where Russia is still in the Ukraine, destroying the Ukrainian army, America now and Europe are suffering because all of the sanctions that they thought would destroy Russia are now backfiring because Russia has prepared for it. And now their unipolar petrodollar system is now at risk of being destroyed, given that now China and Russia are teaming up along with Africa and the Middle East to form what is called a multipolar world, bringing an end once and for all to the American hegemony. Right? So that, which I have just explained, is the whole situation regarding Russia, Ukraine, Europe, and the United States. It's not just about Russian unprovoked attack or Russia wanted to build, expand its empire and all that bullshit and nonsense. It runs a lot deeper than that, and those who have sense, those who are intelligent, will see that it's not a war of democracy versus totalitarianism. It's not a war of Europeans versus Russians. Right? It's a war of resources and power. And I think, thankfully, for Africa, for Asia, for Europe and the rest of the world, it seems as if Russia and China will be coming out on top, finally bringing an end to American exceptionalism and unipolarity.